Hello from a very sunny Accra, Ghana. My name is Michael Opoku-Amaning, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Kingsley Opoku-Amaning, also known as Dad. Can you tell me where you were born, please?
I was just born in Nkoko, but really didn't spend more than 2-3 weeks after the birth, and was taken back to Dunkwao. And since my father was setting up a second shop in Takoradi, we went to Takoradi soon after. I think the first artificial harbour created by the British in West Africa. And it was it was in the Western region. In fact, at that time, Western region would include the current Western region and the Central region. So it was the hub of economic activity in Ghana. All the mines, basically, except the ones in Ashanti, a lot of timber, and being a port, it was the sort of the entrance to the Gold Coast. The British had embarked on what became known as the Welfare Acts, that is improving the social and economic participation and life of the colonial people. The mines were expanding, railroad was expanding, they were building a few roads here and there, and things like that. This was followed by the economic, the political self-assertion of the Ghanaians, or the Gold Coast people at the time. You remember 48, the creation of the UGCC, and a lot of the political awareness was centered in Takoradi. It was the, if you like, the hub of the workers' activity at that time, and also to a considerable extent the center of also let's say educational activity. Cape Coast was just coming up. You shouldn't forget that the Cape Coast used to be a capital earlier, before, long time before, I must say. So the Western region at that time was probably the most sophisticated corner region of the then Gold Coast.
What you're saying is that the British, the Welfare Act, they actually want to improve the quality of life for the average Ghanaian worker.
Not the worker, but of the country, expand
Country.
the economic potential of the countries. Of course, it wasn't, although that started in the 30s, and then, it slowed down during the recession period, depression period that followed, was picked up after the war because of the contribution of the colonial people in the war, and the rise of the liberals in the Western world. There was a new view, or there was a resurgence of the view among the liberals in Britain especially, that the colonial people needed to be taken care of, or needed to be helped to improve their life. That was the beginning of, the welfare of human race, if you like. It was a general trend in the thinking of the Western world. Earlier on, colonization was essentially for exploitation, to pacify and to bring us into a form of trade that will benefit the metropolis.
What do you think gave rise to that sentiment of making sure that actually the colonies not only expanded their economic potential, but also just the idea that actually the natives or the citizens of these countries should also see a little bit of benefit?
The First World War, in my opinion, occurred basically because the world had changed and the leaders of the world were not changing. They were still in the 18th, 19th century sort of thinking. The supremacy of the white man, the exploitation of the rest of the world, and, for the benefit of the white man. In fact, the idea of mission civilisatrice, which is going to sort of, civilize us, white man's burden, was, I think, just incidental. It was an excuse. For once, after they'd gone through the First World War, and the aristocratic class or the elite class, particularly in Western Europe, all the old grand families had lost their heirs, and the whole world, their world was in some sort of serious economic conflict, difficulties. I think after that, it was a jolt, but they still didn't have a way out. You remember after that they started talking about the League of Nations and all that, which, as if that wasn't a sufficient jolt, they were still not able to get themselves out of the old structure. So the First World War was the decay of the old world, and an effort to create a new one, but it wasn't with much conviction. So the world continued more or less as it was. Then they got into the period of depression, which again reminded them that the world order, the economic order in Europe, needed, to be reconsidered. And when they got out of the depression, soon after, they got into the Second World War. That was, I think, a more serious reminder that they needed to reorganize things. So the world was reorganized differently. A view of the world, the view of the old world changed. So, or the old view of the world changed. A new view had to emerge, but they were just feeling their way around. And there was more progressive, is the word, the more progressive, how do you put it, outlook on how people should relate to each other economically, socially, and politically. In those days, whatever money that was being made, you should remember by 50-51, Nkrumah was the leader of government business.
Can you just explain the structure of that, of how it works? You had the British, the governor at the top.
You had the governor at the top.
Was it Arden?
Yes, Sir Arden Clark. Right? Then you had Nkrumah was the leader of government business to start with, and later on became the prime minister.
And how much autonomy did, as a leader of government?
I do believe that the governor had an oversight. Nkrumah had, to the extent acceptable within the confines of the treasury, the budget, he could propose a program. And key to his program basically was the building of infrastructure, but above all, education. So I remember very well his pet program was the expanded, what we call the expanded educational program. Yeah, EEP at the time, which meant that a lot of schools were being opened everywhere. And there was a lot of encouragement for people to go to school. So I do remember that I had a lot of encouragement from my parents, my father, my mother, my aunties. Everyone thought I was a bright person. In fact, if I could hack back to what they used to tell me, I shouldn't be in the situation that I am now. I should be doing something greater with my life. So there was a lot of confidence bubbling in everybody. Opportunities were being created. Jobs were not necessarily available, but when you are in the port city like Takoradi, you could see people working. Now, if the Takoradi people were going on strike periodically for more salaries and for other things, then it meant that jobs were available. They were not afraid to lose their jobs, and salaries were not that bad. Gold Coast was then at that time not only a model colony, it's a colony that was expanding, and the people were happy. I remember very well the high life music everywhere. People were dancing. People were happy generally. Agriculture was beginning to boom. There was food, especially in the Western region where the weather were favored, all sorts of things. My father was adamant because his father was very much interested in disputes and litigation and all that. So my father has sworn, as a Christian spiritualist, never to allow any of his kids to do law or go anywhere near politics and all that. So he wanted a more practical sort of career, an architect. In those days, a draftsman. Then from draftsman become an architect or something like that was something you needed to do. My teachers thought I should, do law, continue to do all sorts of things. And my mother thought I should be a doctor and, all sorts of things. So everybody we all believed, the sky was your limit. Whatever ambition you wanted to pursue, resources were available. Of course, I shouldn't say it was available to everybody in the village, in the lower class or whatever. But if you found a bit of fortune, and it was in the sort of the contacts where people you have an expanded horizon. You have a rather good horizon of what you can do in life. The sky was your limit. As a matter of fact, we only needed to have the ambition, and you find the way to to build up your life.
Just in terms of context, where did the chiefs sit into this structure, or sort of colonial structure?
There was a sort of a controversy really going on in those days. I must say that we were emerging from a strict, traditional, more or less feudal structure. Cities or towns were beginning to emerge. People were breaking loose of traditional and tribal links and feudal links. Not in a very considerable manner, but they were beginning to break loose. Because they were coming to towns, they were becoming clerks, they were having jobs and all sort of things. It could have been faster if the colonial administration had opened up quickly the public service and had even embarked on massive infrastructure and allowed the economy to be grown, as it eventually later on with Nkrumah they started doing at an accelerated pace. But at least there was the beginning, right? You should remember that just 50 years before, right, the year 1900, we were not considered as human beings. Not just 50 years earlier, 2 generations earlier. You know, it was difficult for the African to prove to the world that he was a human being just like anybody else. Slavery had more or less stopped, but it was being done in a different manner. Discrimination was almost the order of the day. Even when it was not overt, we were being told, it was inbuilt in the structure of colonialism, and was inbuilt in everywhere. You know, so you may get 1 or 2 bright niggers that you may like, but you may want to use, they might open the doors for them. But in the mindset of the dominant white class, you don't want a smart nigger to be telling you that he's capable of running his own affair, or that he would be capable of telling you what you, the white man, should do. So we still were in that sort of structure and in that sort of world, but it was beginning to sort of to change. Things were shifting, but gradually. Actually, it was not shifting fast enough probably for the African, but it was shifting probably too fast for the white man who had built this sort of system and was benefiting from it. This, in our dealings with the white man, we served very well as a middle, and therefore I believe that they were prepared to give us, through their indirect rule and all that, give us the opportunity to do things. Now, for a long time, the bosses of this middleman structure were the chiefs, right? And when it got into a situation where there was crisis, that is, there was less resource available to that middle group, the chiefs couldn't take it all. The ordinary people in the middle therefore had to make demands on the chief. And the chiefs were therefore seen as collaborating with the whites. And the ordinary person, Ghanaian or tribal man, was not benefiting. Now, I think it came from the simple fact that the chiefs had to become dictatorial to stifle or contain some of the ambitions and the aspirations of the ordinary person. And therefore, their chiefs became unpopular. I, for one, am not very much in favor of chieftaincy, honestly, because it is against my whole outlook in life. I don't think people should consider themselves by birth that they have the right to do anything else. But I do accept that this is a relic of history, and that our system at least has our chieftaincy and tradition system has the other advantage of not knowing exactly who is going to be chief until a few people. It's restrictive, yes, but the one who, among the restricted group, demonstrate the capacity to lead is the one who is selected to lead. The majority of Ghanaians wouldn't want to do away with chieftaincy. I used to be surprised about this, but so did I notice that the majority of the British wouldn't want to do away with the aristocracy. So it's probably part of human nature, and it's when you've gone through this for thousands of years, I think it becomes part of you. But we need to modify it in a way that it becomes responsive to our current needs and our aspirations too.
And so essentially, Nkrumah was a big disruptor. I mean, he was a big disruptor to Ghanaian culture, way of life, even their future, even the way they identify with themselves and the Gold Coast.
Not only a disruptor of Ghanaian and African, he was a disruptor of the world.
Yes.
Because I said earlier on, only 50 years before him, the world wasn't sure that we were even human beings. And when he sets out to prove that the African is capable of managing his own affair, that he is equal to the white man, that was a bold assertion.
And actually, I was just watching a documentary, and just to see how the science of eugenics, the science of academic racism. I mean, these were in the best institutions in the world, the Oxford, the Cambridges, and others. And so, if you were an African going to these universities, if you had the chance to, you could definitely come out often, hating your culture, essentially yourself and your own race, because everything told you that actually the black man was inferior, and therefore the ambitions should be set so low. So when Nkrumah came, he was head of he was essentially the head of the Ghanaian business, and then he became prime minister, 56, 57,
which was more or less as a title that needed to be conferred, but because as a leader of government business, he was in fact prime minister. The question is whose government and whose business, but it is just that it is a government and a business at that time set by the party that has won the elections, but the governor had to make sure that they don't go too far. Yeah. That was it.